Denver Broncos linebacker Drew Sanders could be in line for more playing time here in 2025, but he'll have to beat out Alex Singleton and Justin Strnad for the starting job. How might he do that? We'll break that down and much more here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day for all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, more every single day, all year long. This is the place to be. So thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, become one. It's easy. It's simple. All you have to do is click subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Cody Roark, credentialed Broncos reporter here from Mile High Sports, where I cover the team in person in Dove Valley every day. Plus, you get my written work over there, milehighsports.com, plus daily Broncos coverage here on the show. Sayre Bedinger will rejoin us next week here for the show. We still got a jam-packed episode for you here today. We'll wrap things up by highlighting Alvin Kamara. Could the Broncos maybe inquire about trading for him? That's one question sent in from one listener for our Broncos mailbag here today. Also, what three positions should the Broncos prioritize in this year's NFL draft? We're just 1 month away. But we're going to open things up by answering one of the Broncos listeners' mailbag questions that they sent in surrounding Drew Sanders. What is his path for more playing time? You're going to get all that on today's episode of the show. So let's open things up here. Obviously, getting into our handy-dandy Broncos mailbag. We just got a letter, and it comes in from an avid listener of the show who asks the question, Drew Sanders, what would it take for him to get more playing time here in 2025, especially with there being a little bit of a log jam at the inside linebacker position? I think when you look at it, you got to go through and analyze, okay, what do we know about that position so far? I think you open it up. We know Dre Greenlaw is a starting linebacker here for the Broncos. Not sure if it's going to be the Will or the Mike. We just know it's going to be off-ball linebacker. He brings a lot of different values to, I think, what the Broncos want to do defensively in terms of being able to blitz the linebacker, being able to have your linebacker stay back in coverage while you're blitzing the other guy or you're blitzing in the nickel. You have a guy who can range sideline to sideline with Dre Greenlaw. But how does that impact, the other position there? And I think this is where Drew Sanders really comes into the equation, because right now it's a question as to what will it look like for Drew Sanders to get on the football field. As we know, going back to the NFL Scouting Combine, George Payton said it. He said, we believe that Drew is a starting linebacker here in the league, and certainly he's going to compete for that job there. It's not going to be handed to him. So that factors in. Okay, this was said before the Broncos went out there and got Dre Greenlaw. Okay, so now that we know that Greenlaw is one of those guys, he's going to be solidified and cemented on the Broncos defense. Okay, that means that one of those linebacker spots is wide open. Okay, so who's in that position right now? We know Drew Sanders is in there. Alex Singleton's in there. Justin Strnad, and also Lavelle Bailey is in there. And from what we know, based on what Justin Strnad said when he initially re-signed with the Broncos on a one-year deal, he was told by the team he's going to compete to start. So that means that Justin Strnad, Alex Singleton, Drew Sanders, and even we'll throw Lavelle Bailey's name into the mix here, are likely to be competing for a starting job at inside linebacker. So for Drew to be able to get on the field more here for the Broncos, it's going to take a handful of things. I think one thing that is in his favor right now is that he now knows going into the season where he's going to be playing, right? His rookie season, obviously he's drafted. He's playing off-ball linebacker. Middle of the season, they say, hey, we're going to switch you to edge rusher. And obviously the Broncos, they identified in the draft process his ability to be a pressure player. That's what Sean Payton has called him in terms of talking about the vision for him. He played inside backer, off-ball backer at Arkansas after initially playing edge rusher when he was at Alabama, transferred to Arkansas, played off-ball, and was very effective there. 9.5 sacks, I believe, in his last year there at that position. Then he comes to Denver. Okay, you make the position switch. It's harder at the NFL level, when you come in. You're used to playing one position. Okay, at college, it might be easier to make a position change. But in the middle of an NFL season, when all you know going into it is, hey, off-ball linebacker, I have to understand these coverages. I have to understand my run fits. Now I'm an edge rusher. Really, my priorities change to, okay, I'm rushing the quarterback. If we're stunting, where am I going? But I also have to maintain edge contain. I can't let anybody get outside of me. So your responsibilities in terms of the complexity of it, I think, change a little bit. It's more complex, I think, to play off-ball linebacker because You have to play against the run. You have to account for the pass. And that's hard because the game is played at such a high speed, whereas you're an edge rusher, go get the quarterback, make sure nobody gets outside of you, stop the run. It's a little bit easier in terms of your job characteristics. So now his second season, let's go to that. Okay, he was an edge rusher, and now he's preparing as an edge rusher. In April, he tears his Achilles and is going to miss, a good portion of the season. Timeline expected for October. He comes back in October. He plays edge rusher a little bit. Then they switch him to off-ball linebacker, and his one pressure that he gets, they send him against the Chargers against Justin Herbert. He goes through, and he gets the sack there on that one pressure. And so it's like, all right, they moved him back to off-ball linebacker. What does it mean? So now he's having to relearn everything he needs to know in Vance Joseph's defense. As an inside linebacker, you have to also know if the nickel is blitzing, do I have to replace him in coverage, or is it the other guy? How do I align? Like, am I going to be the strong side, Mike? Am I going to be the Mike, or am I going to be the Will? The Will is always the weak side guy. It depends on what the Broncos tagged him as there, especially with all their revolving personnel. So that is, it was a little bit of a mystery. But now that we know that he's an inside linebacker, as confirmed by Sean Payton, by George Payton at the NFL Combine, his focus this entire offseason might be to lose some weight because they had him bulk up to play the edge, or he could just be the stout guy there. He still can run. I've seen him run, can still move sideline to sideline relatively quickly. It's just up here, though. Right now, it's like I have to understand my coverage dynamics and responsibilities. He can play linebacker. He's instinctive there. It's just being able to get back saying, hey, now I'm going to be playing in space a lot more than I was as an edge rusher. Now I got to compete against a guy like Alex Singleton, who plays with his hair on fire. Granted, is coming off the ACL injury, but he's running full speed right now. He's going to be fully ready to go for OTAs, for training camp. They're going to likely bring him along there, but really Singleton's competing to start this upcoming season, which is interesting because he's a team captain, a guy who's well-loved and respected in that locker room. But I understand it from the Broncos business standpoint here, where they have to focus on, okay, we know what we have with you, but we also have young guys that we have a vision for, and we need to see if that's coming along quicker than we anticipated. For Drew Sanders, he got put in an unfair spot, in my opinion, by having two position switches in his first two seasons in the NFL. That hurts him. And that's not necessarily a mark against Drew Sanders. That's a negative mark, in my opinion, on the coaching staff and the evaluation process. I understand needs arose, but you impact a player's mentality with that. It's rough. Like, you have to learn, throw out everything you learn, and then relearn all the new stuff here all over again with your position switch. And then you got Justin Strnad, who stepped in for Singleton last year. And look, I'm higher on what Justin Strnad did last year than I think most people are. There's some things that I know in terms of the coverage dynamics, what happened, what went wrong. And I think that a lot of the blame being placed on Justin Strnad, I think, is very unwarranted. What Justin showed me is that he can play for you. He can start for you if you need it. So he's going to get an opportunity to do that. He has grown and he's developed in a positive trajectory every single year. That's why he's been on several staffs. He's made it through several coaching staffs here. He's really the last holdover from the John Elway draft era, which is crazy to think about. So for me, for Drew Sanders, you're going to have to beat those guys out here in training camp and likely the preseason. I don't think this is going to be solved in week 1 or week 2 of the preseason. I think this is going to be, we're going into the regular season. After that third and final preseason game, we'll have a better idea as to who we want. And I wouldn't even be shocked if in the regular season, Denver plays around with rotating some guys a little bit to really determine that. And you know what? It may be good to have one, like your two linebackers starting guys locked in. I don't necessarily believe it would hurt if you're rotating maybe one or your top two options there, if you're still undecided. Denver did that early on last season, even after Alex Singleton's injury. So I don't think it can hurt you, but you obviously want to have continuity. You want to know what your lineup is going to be, but it also makes it harder for teams early on in the season to game plan because they're like, wait, we don't know exactly who their true starters is. They're rotating guys. This guy does this well. When this guy comes in, he does this well. And so you have to kind of create a little bit of a game plan complexity for opposing coordinators. But it's easier for them to adjust to than it is me talking about it here theoretically. So I think for Drew, if he doesn't win the starting job for the Broncos, alongside Dre Greenlaw, I think that Drew could still get on the playing field quite a bit. Look, he's going to have to play a lot of special teams regardless. Now, if he starts, won't play as much special teams, but he's going to play special teams if he's not the starter there. I think that you can benefit maybe in a dime package, right? You can maybe put Drew Sanders as your dime backer. He's got good athleticism to him. Do you envision that for Dre Greenlaw though, right? What if you go big nickel? That's where maybe a guy like J.L. Skinner can come into the mix. So ideally it's envisioning your different packages you can have and maybe use for Drew Sanders when he's in. But if he's going to be a pressure player and he's not the starter, when you put him in, the thing that I'm thinking about is teams are going to pick up, hey, He's usually a guy they use for pressure situations or maybe passing down situations. That might be something the Broncos have to overcome here. But I think that Drew is in a good position to compete with those other two guys, and even honorable mention Lavelle Bailey for a starting job here. And I think the continuity of him staying and knowing what position he's playing this season going into it, I think is going to pay off for him. I think it's going to give him an advantage where he can just focus and play loose. And now you have a new inside linebacker coach as well that is coming into it and has, I think, a good side on it as saying, hey, you know what? This is a brand new slate. We know who our one guy is. Competition. There, it's good for everybody, makes the defense better. Who's going to go away with that? I'm excited to see Drew Sanders compete. He's a quiet guy. He puts his head down. He works hard. But it's going to be tough to hold off guys like Alex Singleton and Justin Strnad and maybe even Lavelle Bailey from that standpoint. That's one question we got sent into our Broncos mailbag here on today's episode of the show. But up next, one listener, Broncos Country, asked what 3 positions should the Broncos prioritize? And we'll tell you why running back and defensive line might be the top 2 positions here that Denver should take a look at. We'll break that down and much more on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Upwork. And scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, developing, design, and more. Experts ready to help take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. And it's important to find the right talent. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. They have a fast and easy hiring process where posting a job is free and simple. And within a day, with multiple qualified candidates to choose from, you have that access and that information right at your fingertips. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Today's episode of the show is also brought to you by our friends over there at Game Time. And imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There is nothing like experiencing a big game in person. And that's where Game Time comes in handy, because getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices for your favorite sporting events, concerts, comedy events, theater events, whatever's going on in your local area. Game Time has the best deals and the best prices possible inside of their app. And they also have Game Time Picks, where curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And look, you can check the Game Time app, and they have a handful of amazing deals on some of the huge matchups coming up in the sporting world. They have super deals where their lowest price guarantee is a promise, or else Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. With the NFL draft fast approaching here in a month, what 3 positions should the Denver Broncos prioritize in the draft? With free agency in the bag, the Broncos, they have a multitude of options and a lot of flexibility when it comes to their roster, their draft positioning, and their draft capital to build the best roster possible here going into 2025. But what positions take priority? We'll continue talking about that here on today's episode of the show. Real quick, once again, wanted to thank the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks for making us your first listen. We got you covered literally every single day, all year long, for everything that pertains to your favorite team. That is the Denver Broncos. Going into our Broncos Country mailbag that listeners of the show sent in their questions on Twitter and other avenues. We could ask the question here with free agency being over and the Broncos making the splashes that they did on offense with Evan Ingram, the defense with Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw. What 3 positions should the Broncos prioritize in the NFL draft in the month of April? And I think this is a very interesting question because I mentioned it, roster flexibility. Denver's in a really good spot. And the way that they have built this team in the last 2 years, factoring in Sean Payton's first draft class here with the Broncos, they had to trade up. They didn't have a first or second round pick. They had to trade up to the back end part of round number 2 to grab Marvin Mims. Round 3, you go through and you get Drew Sanders. You trade back into round 3 to be able to get Riley Moss. That draft class has been fun to watch, right? But, with the limited resources that Sean Payton had initially coming into it, you didn't necessarily get a lot of choices in that, right? And so your hit rate has to be important with that. And I think that those guys have been hits. Drew Sanders, we just talked about him in the previous segment, I think is going to have an opportunity to get more playing time. And you can maybe learn a little bit more about whether or not that was a good investment by the Broncos initially in the draft here. Last year's draft class, obviously going through Bo Nix, a lot of the rookies, Troy Franklin expected to have a bigger role this upcoming season. Devon Bailey being a gem, as a late round pick for them. Denver is in a good spot here. So what three positions should they prioritize? Well, they went out in free agency. They got obviously linebacker and safety. They re-signed DJ Jones. So a lot of questions on the defensive side. Do they continue to invest in the trenches? Certainly a possibility. Offensively, they go out and they get Evan Ingram. You already have a wide receiver room that Sean Payton has already talked about, that they believe that they're higher on them than most people think that they are. You got Cortland Sutton in that room. So for me, I look at it and I think it has to be, if we're looking at the positions, has to be running back, defensive line, and I would even say tight end at this point too, right? And I know what you're thinking. Well, Cody, they just signed Evan Ingram. Ingram's going to come in, play tight end, play that joker role here for the Broncos. And look, I think you're going to see a lot of different ways that Sean's going to use him. You're going to use him in line. You're going to use him in the slot. You're going to use him flexed out to the outside. I also believe within my heart of hearts, you're going to see him at times in the backfield. They can do a lot of different things with him in that role specifically. Think about how we saw Marvin Mims start to get utilized, and think about the size and the athleticism the guy like Evan Ingram has. Well, let's say you pair both of those guys in the backfield. In passing situations out of a two-high shell where you're going to see the defense have those two safeties, and you might get a one-on-one with one of the inside linebackers, or if the defense decides to go cover one or cover zero, if those guys are blitzing, someone's going to have to account for the guys coming out of the backfield, right? Whether it be Marvin Mims, Evan Ingram, both those guys. I think we're going to see Evan used in that role here. But for me, I still think you look at adding a running back here. And that's obviously on the table here in the first round, second round, third round. I think those are certainly the options. And certainly Sean Payton has talked about it over the course of his time conducting NFL drafts. They have the ability to find good running back talent in the mid to later rounds. They've done that. There's a proven track record of that, obviously, with Alvin Kamara being one of the guys. We'll talk about him in another context a little bit later on here in the show. But for me, if you can get a playmaking running back in either round one or round two, I like that, because you're adding value to an already young running back room that the Broncos, they like some of the guys, but they want to push the needle a little bit there. And they want to see if maybe they can get a guy who can really establish himself. And then everything else, as you know, Sean believes in a committee approach. He doesn't really believe that the bell cow back in today's game, unless you have guys like Derrick Henry, it really exists at that point. You have to have a handful of backs because of the contact, because of the amount of snaps that those guys say. But I think that the Broncos and Sean Payton can be drastically better and not muddying the water with messing with the rotation too much like they did in 2024. Establish a clear pecking order here. Running back can do that. Let me talk about defensive line here, because this is something that Sayre Bedinger and I are going to talk about in tomorrow's episode of the show as well. I look at defensive line, and we go back to what Sean Payton said. They want to continue to invest in the trenches. Yes, they got John Franklin Myers. They've got Zach Allen. They've got DJ Jones back. They got Malcolm Roach and Jordan Jackson. But you can always continue to add to that position group, because I think that there are other guys on the roster like Inyoma Uwazurike who won't necessarily have a guaranteed spot. You want to continue to elevate the floor of that room, and you need to have a good established rotation with those guys there. And I think that the Broncos are invested in that, especially after seeing what the Philadelphia Eagles did to the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. That's something you should look at. And then I also think tight end should be another area of focus. That's something we're going to highlight here. I think obviously round one, it doesn't seem like that's going to be on the table. That's something we're going to dive deeper into on tomorrow's episode of the show here. But this year's tight end class, you can add a valuable guy there, because I believe that Nate Adkins is going to move from tight end. I think he's going to replace Michael Burton at fullback, barring Burton re-signing. I think he can play that role. Plus, he can provide a pass-catching dynamic out of the backfield here. We haven't seen too many handoffs there to Nate Adkins at this point, but that's something that will probably come up here with Sean if he makes that transition fully. You got Evan Ingram at tight end. You've got Adam Troutman, and you got Lucas Kroll, who's developing. You got Thomas Yasmin, who's really a guy that the Broncos believe is on a really good developmental trajectory. That shouldn't take away from adding one of these, I'd say, polished pass-catching tight ends in this year's NFL draft. Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon. Mason Taylor being an option here. If the Broncos are truly out in round one on the tight end conversation, if Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland aren't there, if that's not their interest, then you can add value here still later on in the rounds there and still get a premier pick, obviously, with your 20th selection overall, depending on what position they go. Will that be running back? tight end or defensive line. I think that the Broncos have plenty of options to choose from there. So for me, those would be the three positions I would prioritize there: running back, D-line, tight end, in no specific order. If Denver goes with their 20th pick, or if they trade up or trade back, and that's one of those position groups, the first ones they take in the top 100 of the draft, I'm happy with that. I think that's a good value, a great haul here for the Broncos. And certainly I trust Sean Payton and George Payton's evaluation and their process for it and eyeing talent. And they're bringing guys into the locker room that are going to fit the culture of what they want to do. So I'm excited about that. Denver's not in a position where they have to press. They're not in a position, and nor have they done this, where they've drafted based on need. They've taken the best player available in the approach in the last couple of drafts, in which the picks that they've had. And Bo Nix was their best player available. He's the guy that Sean Payton wanted all along last season. Contrary to whatever people are saying out there, that has never changed. It was Bo Nix. There was never any other quarterback that was at the top of their list. Bo Nix was the guy here. So I think it's a great question sent in on our Broncos Country mailbag here on today's episode of the show. But Broncos Country, we're not done yet. One listener of Broncos Country asks whether or not Alvin Kamara and the Broncos should happen. Should the Broncos pick up the phone and call about trading for Alvin Kamara? I'll tell you why that's not a good idea here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
The fourth quarter action of today's episode of the show is here in Broncos Country. We're going to open up our mailbag here for our final question of the day. Should the Broncos trade for Alvin Kamara? One question sent in by an avid listener out there in Broncos Country. Real quick, I want to say thanks once again to the everydayers out there. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen. We're here for you every single day. That's our promise here at the Locked On Podcast Network. We have it so good where we get to bring Broncos fans great coverage of their favorite team at the local scale, at the national scale. No more talking show, hosts on the national level tearing down your team because they don't watch or they don't pay attention. You get all that here, Locked On Broncos. We pay attention. We cover your team, boots on the ground, every single day in Dove Valley. So with that said, let's open up our mailbag. Question sent in from an avid listener of the show asking us whether or not the Broncos should trade for Alvin Kamara. And look, I understand the idea and the appeal for this, but I want to go back to last season here for the New Orleans Saints when things were going as bad as they were, and they're firing Dennis Allen, and you were looking at a potential rebuild where they were going to tear everything down. They're going to have a brand new head coach, and it was going to be a long, drawn-out process here for the Saints that you would have expected, hey, there's going to be a fire sale here. They're more likely to move on from Derek Carr. Well, they go out and they get Kellen Moore as their next head coach, and they've really kind of committed to not rebuilding, just to hit a reset and say, hey, we want to compete. That's what's going on with the New Orleans Saints. Don't believe me? Go check out our guy, Ross Jackson, over there at Locked On Saints. He has you covered, boots on the ground daily from the New Orleans Saints beat perspective here. But, really the thing is around the trade deadline, there were conversations, and we were even looking at it as well because the Broncos, they weren't getting a lot of production out of the running back position, as everybody knows that paid attention to the team. And I asked Ross, I asked other beat reporters in New Orleans about Alvin Kamara. Like, could the Saints look to trade him? And Ross told me, and other Saints reporters told me, like, no, I don't think that's going to happen. We think that Kamara is going to stay. And certainly enough, I think it was maybe a week, 2 weeks after the Broncos beat the Saints on Thursday Night Football, Alvin Kamara signs an extension with the New Orleans Saints. And certainly that kind of rang true. Like, hey, he wasn't really planning on going anywhere. Same thing for guys like Cam Jordan, who were rumored to be on the trade block. I think that was more speculation. There was substance to that. And the idea behind it was, hey, these guys, if they're going to embrace a rebuild and they're going to tear things down, give these guys who have done so much for your organization a chance to go off and maybe compete and have a chance. And everyone immediately thought, well, let's reunite Alvin Kamara with Sean Payton. I think for as much as Sean Payton would love to have Alvin in the mix here for the Broncos, I even think that even Sean knew that Kamara is probably never going to leave New Orleans. Now, he just signed an extension here. And I think some of the belief was that, hey, Kamara doesn't want to play for any other team. Of course, he loves Sean Payton, but he doesn't want to play for any other team around the NFL. So if that were the case, if he were to get dealt or if there was talks of him getting dealt, there could have been a situation maybe where Alvin Kamara said, hey, you know what? I'm good. I've accomplished a lot in my career. I've had a really good payday before. I'm going to retire versus him going out there and playing with another team. I think it's important for Alvin to remain on the team that drafted him. I think that's an important thing for him personally that he feels about. So while it would benefit the Broncos to add Alvin to the mix, you get a veteran running back who can also be a joker in the deck. I know our good friend Sayre's pointed out here on the show that, hey, when you look at a deck of cards, there's usually 2 jokers in it. The Broncos got one in Evan Ingram. And now, if they were to trade for a guy like Kamara, they could have 2 jokers in the deck. But I don't see that being the case. Now, it's still possible that even if you sign the extension, the Saints could look to deal him. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think conversations or phone calls on that would go very far. But so I don't think that's going to be the piece here for the Broncos. And look, I understand there's a couple of veteran options out there. I truly believe just the vibe that I have here from seeing how Sean has worked and how he and George have maneuvered NFL free agency, there have been a handful of other veteran running backs that have been available, right? Not necessarily guys that really fit the joker role or that mold, but now that that Evan Ingram is going to be that joker, to me, I just see them going with the youth movement at the running back position in the NFL draft. I think if they add a player, it'll be at running back, it'll be at defensive line or tight end. But the idea that they're going to trade for a veteran at this point, I think that's kind of off the table. I know we've seen in the draft in the last couple of years, Sean has orchestrated a deal. I mean, he acquired in his first year in Denver in the 2023, after that season going into the 2024 NFL draft. The 2023 NFL draft, you saw him trade for Adam Troutman. I think it was a 6th-round pick. We've seen in the 2024 NFL draft, we saw the Broncos trade and acquire a veteran player like John Franklin Myers. So there is maybe a possibility to monitor that here, but as free agency continues and the Broncos not yet signing a veteran back to the mix, I think that Sean's going to go with the youth movement here, right? Because you've got your quarterback in place, you've got a veteran receiver, Cortland Sutton, you got a veteran joker tight end option here in Evan Ingram. Your offensive line is established, and you really like what you have in your younger guys like the Tyler Badets, obviously the Jaleel McLaughlin. Sean loves Jaleel there. Audric Estime, we haven't seen enough from him yet, but we've seen some flashes to maybe make him an exciting throw in there. Blake Watson is one of these guys that are on the roster that has joker traits to him at the running back position. And so in-house, you might have a chance to develop Blake Watson more. And what we saw in the regular season, granted a small sample size against the Chargers in that other Thursday night game, I came away impressed with Blake Watson. When they picked up Watson initially during, rookie minicamp and OTAs, one thing that Sean Payton was asked is, what would you like to do with a player like Blake Watson? And Sean said to him, I'd like to throw him the football a lot. So to me, he sees that, and you need a replacement in the return game. Obviously, replacing Tremon Smith, Trent Sherfield's not going to be the returner next to Marvin Mims this upcoming season, but you want another guy. Blake Watson right now probably fits the mold a little bit better than anybody else. He and Tyler Badet will probably be in the mix for that job and that role on special teams. So I don't necessarily see Kamara being, something of significant interest here for the Broncos. I'm sure that they might have already had those conversations, but I don't think anything's going to formulate to that. Our good friend Ross Jackson will probably have a better idea on that. As well as they head into the Kellen Moore era where, hey, the offense is so important. He's an offensive-minded head coach. He's not going to get rid of his best running back and pass-catching option. They're going to likely keep him in the mix there with the Saints, especially as they're committing to sticking with Derek Carr for now. So, I would take that off the table in terms of an option and maybe just convince yourself that the Broncos, they're going to go younger here at the running back position, and that's going to be the way here with this offense. I think it's exciting. I think with this year's draft class of running backs, I think that Denver can get a really good back, whether it be round 1, round 2, round 3. We'll see who are some other under the radar gems that maybe go round 4, round 5 that aren't necessarily being talked about enough. That's always another appeal. But right now, the Broncos, they got 4 backs that they're happy with, that they like, that they believe are on a really good developmental track. But I still think that they're going to add. But I don't think it's going to be free agency. I don't think it's going to be via trade. I think it's going to be with the NFL draft and some of these younger guys here. But with that said, Broncos Country, I appreciate you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the show. If you're a brand new listener and you loved everything that you got here when it comes to Broncos coverage, make sure you do us a favor. Hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every day, all year long. Tomorrow's episode of the show, for all you everydayers out there, all signs point and maybe indicate that the Broncos may not go tight end with their first round pick at number 20, whether they even trade up or trade back. Tight end doesn't seem like a valuable option right now based on what we've heard from our good friend Mike Kliss. Sayre Bedinger, myself are going to debate, if not tight end, what position? We'll break that down and much more on tomorrow's episode of the show. We'll see you then.